probably one of the only Asian kids in my school growing up, like elementary school, middle school. So I was born in the city of Chicago, but then when I was 5, we moved out to Darien. And that's where I went to elementary school and part of middle school. I was there until 6th grade. And then my family and I moved to Oak Brook. Once we moved to Oak Brook, where I finished junior high and high school, I was still one of like maybe a couple Asian kids at school. But then once I hit high school, there was a little bit more diversity. I wouldn't say that it was a very diverse population, but there were a lot of Asians there. But I guess because I grew up being sort of the only one, that's what I sort of became comfortable with. So I didn't really hang out with those big crowds. I mean, if anything, I hung out with more Indians than I did with more people who were sort of, what am I, East Asian? Is that what? Okay, so more so than the East Asians that looked more like me. But generally speaking, it was predominantly white. And then there would be some Asian people. In Oak Brook, I would say there's a higher Asian population than probably any other predominantly white area, because there are a lot of traditional, professional types in the area, like doctors, lawyers, engineers, and whatnot. So I was around a lot of the children of these people, but I wouldn't say that we were super tight or anything. Okay, well, let me tell you a story. When I was 5, I told my dad I wanted to be an artist. And he told me, don't be an artist, you can't make any money with that, be a doctor. And I said, oh, okay. But then by the time I was 10, I discovered writing, and I was like, I want to become an author, which has remained a dream of mine forever. Eventually, I was like, I want to be an English teacher. It became apparent that my strengths were more in the arts and in language. In high school, I also took French and Spanish at the same time, and I did very well in those classes. My mother in Taiwan majored in arts, like fine arts, and my father was an electrical engineer, so he was always the voice of like old school, traditional, you have to be this or that. And my mother was much more supportive, not necessarily like, if you want to be an artist, that's great, I'm going to send you to the best art school or anything like that, but she was more emotionally supportive, where she wouldn't be so strongly she wouldn't so vocally discourage me. Then when I was 14, I decided I wanted to become a fashion designer. In high school, when it became time to apply for universities, I wanted to apply to schools that had fashion design as a major, but my father wouldn't hear of it. So he, behind my back, applied to the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. And I only kind of recently found an old book from the School of Engineering, or the College of Engineering at U of I, in my garage. And I was just kind of like, this is so typical of my dad. He wanted me to he secretly wanted me to maybe become an engineer because that's what U of I is so good at. And I was just like, this is ridiculous, because I've never, ever, ever, ever shown interest in becoming an engineer in my entire life. And he was just very like pushing his ideals onto me. And I have never been very receptive to that. I've always been very headstrong. My father, when I was very little, tried to take that route of being super strict and forcing me to study hard. But if you talk to anybody that I knew in either high school or undergrad for that matter, most of them would say that they never ever saw me read, or, well, maybe not read because I read for fun, but they never ever saw me study or, killing myself to get good grades. I fortunately was able to get pretty decent grades. I graduated at the top 25% of my high school. I did pretty well in undergrad as well, but it was never because of that mentality of like, I have to study hard, otherwise I'll disappoint my parents. My mother was much more emotionally supportive in that she understood that if I ever struggled hard, but I worked really hard in a class, because I honestly, frankly, I was not very accustomed to struggling in class. So if I did, for whatever reason, say like when I was taking some science classes, when I decided that I wanted to pursue medicine after my hospitalization, and I was struggling with it, my mother would be much more understanding, and she would be like, well, as long as you're working hard at it and you're really trying, that's what matters, as opposed to whatever the grade is. But my father was much more traditional in that, you know, the grade at the end of the semester is what matters. But he was also the type, like, my cousins from Taiwan came to visit one summer when I was like 12 or something. My dad fashioned a math test for everyone to take just to see how we would perform. And of course I performed the worst because math is not my forte. And that was the type of environment that my dad liked to foster. And my mother used to spend $80 an hour on a math tutor because my dad, even though he was very good at math, could not teach me. That's how much we bumped heads.